opportunity here to win out against the extremes.
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country and indeed around the world. Plenty coming up today. The race to number 10 is far from over, but what do the health and care sectors need to hear from the new Prime Minister? Plus, the drought and water restrictions, what it means for farmers and for pet owners. All of that and more to come, but first let's bring you right up to date with the day's news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. It's midday. Here's the latest. Rishi Sunak has criticised his leadership rival Liz Truss, describing her planned tax cuts as starry-eyed boosterism compared to his own clear-eyed realism. Speaking in The Times, the former Chancellor said putting more borrowed money into the economy risks making inflation worse. Ms Truss says she'll use an emergency budget in September to immediately cut taxes. She's also pledged to bring forward plans to scrap the national insurance hike by 6 months. Former leadership hopeful Penny Mordaunt told us Liz Truss is ready to take the reins.
I think she really wants to ensure she's ready to hit the ground running, to have that emergency budget, to alleviate some of the cost of living issues that people are facing, but also to create that modern economic framework that we need to really fire up our economy and get things going again. That's what people want to see, and that's why I've chosen her. I've got a lot of respect for Rishi, but I think that she really understands what the nation needs now.
Well, meanwhile, Tory MP and former Education Secretary Damien Hinds supports Rishi Sunak. He told GB News he'll introduce more economic support if needed.
He has been clear that that more help may be needed and can be forthcoming. And it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong to put out of the question. This is about a unique situation that we find ourselves in. Combination of COVID and Putin's aggression in Ukraine, and people are finding it extremely difficult to deal with that.
A new report commissioned by Gordon Brown says government support for low-income households will not cover the rising cost of living. It found some families will be worse off by up to £1,600 a year. That's despite an additional £1,200 being offered to the poorest in society. The former Prime Minister is demanding an emergency budget before what he's calling a financial time bomb in October. Malcolm Grimston is Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Technology at Imperial College. He told us the concerns are genuine.
Since the last budget, it's clear that power bills are going to be something like £500 higher than the government was assuming at the time with that group of packages. And it really is a time bomb. We could be looking at half of the country in energy poverty, which is defined as more than a tenth of your income going on energy. It'll swallow up something like a third of the normal pension. I mean, this is totally unprecedented in recent times, or probably ever.
The Environment Secretary is urging water companies to ban the use of hose pipes as forecasters predict dry weather for most of the UK next week. George Eustace says some firms have rightly taken action to lessen the effects of an unusually dry August, and he's encouraging others to do the same. His comments are the first public government intervention and could signal increased restrictions. Last week, Southern Water and South East Water imposed bans for their customers. More than 1,700 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats this week. That's more than half the number rescued in the whole of August last year. Yesterday, 337 people made the journey from France in 10 small boats. Over 18,000 people have now made the crossing this year, the latest Ministry of Defence figures show. Border Force officials brought the vast majority to shore in Dover. However, many were taken to the port of Ramsgate due to concerns about congestion. An 11-year-old girl has died after going missing at a water park in Windsor. Members of the public joined emergency services in the search at Liquid Leisure yesterday afternoon before she was rushed to Wexham Park Hospital. Her death is being treated as unexplained. An investigation is underway. 4 more ships carrying grain have sailed from Ukrainian Black Sea ports today. It's part of a deal to unblock the country's vital food exports amid fears of a global shortage. Ukrainian authorities released video footage showing cargo ships docked in the port of Odessa. The shipments were made possible after Turkey and the UN brokered an agreement between Russia and Ukraine last month. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart, friends.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. The majority of you will have no say in who the next leader of the Conservative Party will be, but each and every one of us will be affected because the winner, he or she, will also be the next Prime Minister of the UK. From the outset, I and many others have said that it would be the economy that would determine how Conservative Party members decided. Now, amid claim and counterclaim from the candidates, some Tories take a longer-term view, essentially the Sunak line, that inflation must be curbed first, more help for the hardest hit will come later. Others, perhaps feeling the cost of living crisis more sharply, want more help now, the Liz Truss prescription. Well, at close of play yesterday, it all got a bit nasty. Sticking to her guns, Truss insisted immediate tax cuts would be on offer, but not further handouts, and she'd speed that whole process up. Sunak repeated that he thought it was too soon to cut taxes, that they wouldn't help those most in need. He added with a real sting that tax cuts simply won't help pensioners nor those hardest hit. So there we have it. Now, Conservative Home and Robert Colville in the Sunday Times have both suggested the Tory party is poised to pick the more rebellious Continuity Johnson candidate. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is Liz Truss, over the Continuity Conservative candidate, Rishi Sunak, more traditional. Now, as ballot papers arrive, the choice gets starker. Truss says she won't only cut taxes, but she'll rush them through. Sunak says he'll find billions more to help with more direct aid for those who need it most. Well, today we're going to look at what's at stake for the two candidates at this crucial stage of the contest, what it means for the future direction of the Conservative Party in government, and whether they can kiss and make up after the bloodletting. In a delicious twist to all of this, the company organising the ballot said that write-in votes for Boris Johnson would not be deemed spoilt papers. They can be counted. So, depending upon the volume, that could prove quite tricky for whichever one wins in the end. We'll also be looking at another issue today, not playing big in the campaign so far, but one that I know is worrying many of you gravely, especially as winter approaches, and that's the NHS and care. A top doctor and a voice from the care sector will be joining me a little later. We've also got two Tory insiders to mull it all over, with another voice of the party on the ground, a local voice. We'll be looking at the hosepipe bans coming into many parts of the country and the impact of the drought on farming and for pet owners. As always, I want to hear what you think. Email me. We are at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We are also on Twitter, as indeed am I, and on Facebook. So get writing. Joining me now, first of all, in the GB News studio this afternoon is Sean Worth. Sean's a former Downing Street advisor and now political commentator. And joining both of us down the line, we have Henry Hill, who is the news editor of Conservative Home, an influential website mainly subscribed to by Conservatives, but also lots of other people dip in to find out what the Conservatives are really thinking. Welcome to both of you. The timing and the nature of the cost of living crisis solution got really hairy last night, Sean.
It did, yeah, and it's amazing to me that I as someone with a bit of an economics background, I do look at what Rishi Sunak's saying, and I think, yeah, technically right, but from a person who's organised also activists and voters, I just look at Liz Truss and say, while head might be Rishi, heart is with Truss, and I think that's reflected in the polling. It's really interesting, actually, that in times of difficult economic outlook, which we're obviously in now, people do tend to move away from what you described as the continuity character and towards somebody that maybe isn't as tested and maybe doesn't have so much polish, but, they're looking for something different.
Yeah. Henry, let me bring you in at that point, because, in fact, I nicked the continuity line both from your website and from the great Robert Colville in the Sunday Times, making precisely that point. And it's not going to be determined so much by clever political analysis. It's the instinct that Tory members have right now who's going to help them most right now, isn't it?
Yeah, essentially. I think what Liz Truss's campaign has really captured is a sense of frustration amongst grassroots activists that, with the exception of Brexit, we're 12 years into having Conservative-led governments, and this just isn't a more conservative country in very many respects. You contrast 2010 to 2022 with, say, 97 to 10 or 79 to 90, and we're not seeing that kind of transformation that you hoped for after this long in government. And Liz Truss, whatever you think of her economic programme, and there are big holes in it, she is at least saying she's going to put the pedal to the metal, she's going to deliver these big tax cuts, and she's going to try, in the years we have left before the next election, to move the dial towards a more conservative Britain.
Also say, sticking with you, Henry, for a moment before bringing Sean back in, you also say on the website this morning, neither candidate really knows just how bad this winter economically could be. They've both got their solutions, but they really don't understand the scale of the thing.
Yeah, bluntly, when Liz Truss is saying there aren't going to be any more handouts, there simply are. If you look at what's coming, if you look at what's going to happen to energy bills, if you spend 5 seconds thinking through the political implications of people on low incomes not being able to heat their homes and all the rest of it, of course there are going to be handouts. The problem with tax cuts is that they, as Rishi Sunak has said, whilst they may be good for stimulating economic growth, they do not concentrate help where it is most needed, because low-income earners, by definition, are paying less tax than higher earners. Now, there's big problems with Rishi's proposals as well. He's been in the Treasury too long, I think. He's never going to give money away when he can do an unpopular loan instead. But whichever candidate wins, when the winter bites, energy costs are through the roof, the government is going to have to step in with a really ambitious programme to help people get through the winter. And we just don't hear either candidate acknowledging that fact yet.
No. The other extraordinary thing, Sean, and I bank everything that Henry just said there and agree with all of it, is that Sunak simply isn't getting the credit that the likes of us who chat about this stuff all of the time would expect, because he has already offered billions. It'll be trickling through come October. He did the furlough, we know all of that, but specific help and aid on the energy crisis, virtually nobody, according to the polls, is giving him any credit for it.
No, that's right. And he's in a difficult place because he's also arguing that the way to control inflation is not to, get people to spend more and give them loads of tax cuts. And, there is an argument for cutting tax on business and deregulating business on that front, I believe. But he's just got a more difficult message. And Liz Truss, and as Henry said, there are probably some big holes in her plan, and she needs to get some people around her that know what they're talking about eventually. But she's saying, I'm just going to cut taxes to help people. Now, 1% income tax cut costs, I think it's about 5 to 6 billion the last time I worked with the Treasury and looked at that, So, and how many percentage do you need really to notice it? It's going to be at least 10, I imagine, to help with your energy costs. You're talking 60, 70 billion just income tax.
But
you're not going to be able to do it.
That means that actually the Sunak package back in the spring statement was worth 2.5p, nearly 3p off income tax.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but people don't see it in those terms because they like the language of income tax.
Yeah. I think they're going to be.
Let me bring Henry in on that point. When those listening to the conversation on radio are seeing a beaming Liz Truss right now there with handbag and getting ready to do a speech. Henry, to what extent, and I remind folk that you are the news editor of Conservative Home, it is a very particular, peculiar, and I mean that in the nice way, not in the weird way, Conservative think tank. The simple fact is that Liz Truss has grasped that language that Sean just used of what is essentially conservative, i.e. we are a party that is supposed to be, Tories might say, tax cutting, smaller state and the rest of it. She's got that mantra and run with it, even if it doesn't make economic sense right now.
Yeah, I think really what Liz Truss represents is how Thatcher, the image of Thatcher, has been misinterpreted by the Conservatives. Because if you think about what Margaret Thatcher actually did, lots of her economic policy was basically just whatever the voters would swallow in order to focus on one or two really important things that she wanted to drive through, such as privatisation, breaking the overmighty trade unions and so on. And instead, that memory has sort of pickled in the Conservative imagination to the point where instead of picking the one or two issues that are really holding Britain back today, now I say on the Conservative home site this morning, number one is housing, but there's also, as you say, big structural problems with the NHS. We instead have we instead have lots of Conservative activists sort of go, oh, what does the Holy Book tell us to do about taxes? Now, it is unfortunate, I think, because ultimately the future of the Conservative Party depends ultimately on it being viewed as, voters are prepared to not like the Tory party as long as they think that it's competent and it's prepared to make hard decisions. Neither of the two candidates are really giving that impression at the moment. We're not hearing any properly credible plans for house building. They're not touching the NHS for quite understandable reasons, but I don't look at either of these candidates at the moment and get the impression that they really grasp the scale of the problems that are going to hit Britain in the 2020s.
Well, staying with you, Henry, and then again I'll bring Sean in. On the NHS, that's quite... I agree with you 100% again. Specifically why I've invited Andrew Vallance-Owen, who's an old mate of mine. He's a surgeon, but he also used to be medical director of Bupa, and also somebody from the care sector, because in a sense, NHS and care is at the heart of this campaign, because Liz has said one of the key things she will do as soon as possible is reverse those increases in national insurance, money which was particularly raised and targeted initially at the NHS and then at the care sector. That money will be gone.
Yes, it will, and there's no answer for how she'll replace it. Now, I think some Conservatives of the Truss persuasion were slightly worried about the health and care levy, because the danger is that you can then endlessly increase it, because who's ever going to say no to a tax on the NHS? But the Tories, they are really in a bind over this, because Labour are really the only party that could probably do the kind of structural reforms to the NHS that we really need. The blunt truth is, it's not the envy of the world. It's not a system that other European first world democracies use, and it manages to use up a vast amount of public spending whilst also not bringing in nearly as much overall cash into the health sector as other countries, because it minimises and diverts private spending. Now, if you're a Tory, and I forgive the candidates for this really, because if you're a Tory leader, you cannot say we need to move towards a European-style system that will involve better off people contributing more of their own money to their care so that we can target tax money at the least well-off and people who need it. You just can't make that case politically. The electorate's not ready to hear it. But ultimately, along with the housing crisis, we are heading into a world where the NHS uses up a vast amount of public money and delivers bad care.
Yeah. On that point as well, about no explanation as to where the money will be coming from, and Vallance-Owen, when he was last on a couple of weeks ago, said, in effect, there shouldn't be a penny more for the NHS until they've worked out, as Henry was just saying, what they want to do with it and why they want to do with it. But sticking with the Tory party as a brand, Truss has also thrown out of the window with this package one of the really powerful weapons they always had against the Labour Party, and that was to say, uncosted pledges. All of her pledges are uncosted. She relies on the fact that it will stimulate growth and that will boost tax take. Big fingers crossed.
Exactly, yeah, she is. I mean, the NHS, I agree, it's a bottomless pit of money terms, and then, I mean, you're going to be talking about social care later. That's a whole other beast that no one's talking about, again, like housing. Liz is making a lot of unfunded spending commitments, and when you, in an inflationary environment, of course, that can stoke inflation. That's one of the arguments that Rishi Sunak has been saying. In her defence, I think, she's speaking to a selectorate of a small number of people in the Conservative Party, and nobody seems to care. As long as this campaign has gone on...
Telling an audience what they want to hear is no way to run a country or an economy.
It's not, but one thing Linton Crosby once said to me, for viewers, is a great election strategy gurus that work
the guru from down under.
From, Australia, worked for the Conservative Party. He always said people can listen to these arguments, but what they're really thinking, and this is, I think he used to do this in focus groups, what they're really thinking is, can I go for a pint with this person, or would I drop my kids off around her house while I quickly rode to the shops or something? And that's how people tend to think and feel with these candidates. And she seems to have that common touch. And whatever she says, however many holes in it, nobody seems to care.
Final question. You first, then Henry. Short and sharp if you can. Once the outcome is announced early September, can these two work together again?
Oh, definitely, yeah. They actually get on quite well. I know Rishi a bit more than Liz, but yeah, they get on really well. It will just be dependent on, say Liz wins, whether Rishi can accept a job below Chancellor's Checker, because he's not going to get that.
Henry, can they work together again?
Everything I've seen suggests that they can, but as Sean says, it really depends on whether or not whoever the loser is prepared to accept whatever job they're offered, because all of the best jobs will have been offered to the actual supporters.
I look forward to the website publishing that list of runners and riders, and I love the running story of Camp Truss phoning up Camp Sunak, people saying, if you want a job, you want to come up ASAP. Henry, always a pleasure. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Sean, I've asked you if you'll hang around and come back in again at 1 o'clock to reflect, not least on what my next two guests are going to be talking about, care and the NHS. But for the time being, to both of you, thank you very much indeed. Sean Worth there, political commentator, former Number 10 insider, and Henry Hill, the news editor of Conservative Home. And whether you be a Conservative or not, it is a website that's well worth looking at to find out what's really going on in that party. Now, Liz Truss, the current front runner, has said that if she wins, she will reverse the increase in national insurance. We've just been talking about that was introduced by, wait for it, Rishi Sunak back in the spring to raise money initially for the National Health Service and eventually for the care sector. But how does that sit with those on the ground? Well, joining me first of all is Simon Walls, who is the clinical lead at St Cecilia's Care Home. Good to see you. What would a Truss victory mean, therefore, for your sector? So far, you haven't seen a penny piece of it because the NHS is going to be getting it. If this reversal in NI happens, you ain't going to get anything.
No, Alistair, we're kind of used to coming second in every race to seek any funding, even to get white papers. It would help us immensely, and I'm sure as we work alongside our colleagues with the NHS, that something that good luck is bringing us closer together so that we work as a whole. So actually the funding comes to both. But at this minute in time, yeah, the Liz Truss decision was quite a shock to us all.
Herself or Rishi Sunak, as an expert, you know, it's your field, it's where you work, you employ people within it as well, that gives you any hope, because both Henry Hill and Sean Worth in that last conversation were saying NHS and care just hasn't been on the agenda. And Henry Hill intriguingly said, and I can understand why, it's dynamite.
No, absolutely. It's been the same for years and years, Alistair. This is nothing new. When COVID came along, social care came more into the spotlight. We're working alongside the NHS. The NHS struggles without social care. The NHS has so many people in beds at this minute in time that are not there for medical reasons. They are there for social reasons. And that's what we're there for. And we're there to support the NHS. Now, if we don't get the funding, and therefore we cannot get the people that we want in to pay them the amounts that they should be paid, then we're going to really struggle. And at this minute in time, we are really struggling.
Yeah. You remind me of the fact that I think it was Andrew Dilnot who famously had the first go at really looking at how the sector might be reformed, because, of course, anyone listening to this conversation who is a user of the care system will know that the majority of folk, and my brother and I went through it with our dad, pay for your own resources because you're lucky enough to be in that position. The actual support that can come from the state, local authority is pretty limited. That was supposed to be a huge change in the middle of the Johnson administration. It's gone out the window.
Yeah, Boris Johnson initially stated that nobody should sell their house to pay for their own care. Unfortunately, people in social care, the people that have fought in wars, that have paid taxes all of their lives, seem to be now the forgotten about people in this country. And it's sad and it's really difficult, and we really need to put something back into social care so that people can get the treatment that they deserve at the end of their lives. It's so sad, Alistair.
Do people like you and your colleagues, because I know at the level you operate, clinical director, you talk to all sorts of people in leadership within the care sector. You know, one of those magic questions, let's assume that Liz Truss won. and you picked up the phone and said, I heard you on GB News the other day saying, oh, it's all dreadful. What specifically do you want done immediately? What's the first call that would really help your sector, really help those men and women in care and those who are getting close to needing care? What would your key answer be?
I think the first thing, Alistair, there has to be reformed. The whole of NHS and social care has to face reform. There needs to be more money given to local government so the funding can be accurate. The people that work in social care, that deliver the care, and also in the NHS, are paid for what they do. At this minute in time, you could work at Sainsbury's or Aldi or Lidl, and you could get more money than you do caring for people in social care. It's not about making people a cup of tea. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot different than that. And it's the people who do it are immense, and I am so proud of them for what we've been through, but it's becoming really difficult. We can't recruit because people don't want to come into social care because there's not enough funding to be able to pay them for the amount that they're worth.
There was a lot within that answer that was about money, whether it was pay or financial support for the costs, and I do understand that. But you said twice in that conversation something that strikes me as being a really important point, and that is the coordination between the health sector and care, because some of the problems in hospitals are, as you or others might call them, bed blockers, people who the hospital have done all they can do for. They either need to go home if that's safe and OK, or they need to go into care. Is there an easy way that doesn't cost a lot of money, whereby the NHS and the care sector could be bolted more together?
I think without looking at it, and again, it comes down to that massive reform, looking at the whole of the NHS as a service, and also with social care and the way that that's doing. So many homes have closed, Alistair, which leads to the fact that there's not many beds left within social care, and those that provide it are struggling to do it because of the staffing and things like that. It needs to be a whole reform. We've been promised white papers, green papers. I can't remember what other colour papers have been promised. Nothing's come to fruition. It seems that it's a forgotten about industry. And the NHS is something that we should be very proud of in this country. But the NHS wouldn't be what it is without social care backing it up.
Totally agree. Simon, thank you very much for your candour and for sharing so much of your time this Sunday afternoon with us here on GB News. A pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Simon Walls, who is the clinical lead at St Cecilia's Care Home. So he not only knows about the care sector, but as clinical lead, he knows a good bit about the NHS as well. I hope you found that food for thought. Don't forget, let me know via email or Twitter what you did make of it, and if you've got your own ideas, particularly if you're in care or you've got a family member who's in care. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on today's programme. Great conversation there regarding the care home sector and what they need from the next Prime Minister. But what about the NHS as a whole? Waiting times, staff shortages, the lack of ambulances, etc. We'll be speaking to a former doctor next, a surgeon, and also the clinical director in his time of Bupa. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be wet in the northwest, but largely dry and sunny elsewhere. Here are the details. The most persistent and heaviest rain this afternoon will be across western Scotland. However, eastern parts will be largely sheltered and dry, with some spells of sunshine developing. Some rain may still be affecting the north coast of Northern Ireland this afternoon, but elsewhere across the country should be dry, although rather cloudy. The rain could also affect parts of Cumbria and Northumberland at times. However, most will be dry with the best of the sun towards the south. Sunshine will certainly not be in short supply across Wales this afternoon, with much of the morning cloud burning away. It'll feel warm with temperatures reaching the low 20s. The cloud will also be melting away across the Midlands throughout the afternoon, allowing plenty of sunshine to develop, feeling warmer than yesterday with maximum temperatures approaching the mid-20s. The east coast of England will offer a little bit of respite from the warmth as sea breezes develop here, but inland we'll see another warm and sunny afternoon. The dry and sunny weather will also be continuing right across southern England, with temperatures across the south in the 20s and potentially peaking around 27 or 28 Celsius. Heading into the evening, and little changes with further rain across the north of the UK, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
on digital, absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It's 12:30. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak has criticised his leadership rival Liz Truss, describing her planned tax cuts as starry-eyed boosterism compared to his own clear-eyed realism. Speaking in The Times, the former Chancellor said putting more borrowed money into the economy risks making inflation worse. Ms Truss says she'd use an emergency budget in September to immediately cut taxes and bring forward plans to scrap the national insurance hike by 6 months. A new report commissioned by Gordon Brown says government support for low-income households will not cover the rising cost of living. It found some families will be worse off by up to £1,600 a year. That's despite an additional £1,200 being offered to the poorest in society. The former Prime Minister is demanding an emergency budget before what he's calling a financial time bomb in October. The Environment Secretary is urging water companies to ban the use of hose pipes as forecasters predict dry weather for most of the UK next week. George Eustace says some firms have rightly taken action to lessen the effects of an unusually dry August. He's encouraging others to do the same. Last week, Southern Water and South East Water imposed bans for their customers. More than 1,700 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this week. That's more than half the number rescued in the whole of August last year. Yesterday, 337 people made the journey from France in 10 small boats. The latest Ministry of Defence figures show that over 18,000 people have now made the crossing this year. An 11-year-old girl has died after going missing at a water park in Windsor. Members of the public joined emergency services in the search at Liquid Leisure yesterday afternoon before she was found and rushed to hospital. Her death is being treated as unexplained. An investigation is underway. And 4 more ships carrying grain have sailed from Ukrainian Black Sea ports today. It's part of a deal to unblock the country's vital food exports amid fears of a global shortage. Ukrainian authorities released video footage showing cargo ships docked in the port of Odessa. The shipments were made possible after Turkey and the UN brokered an agreement between Russia and Ukraine. We're on TV, online and on DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. As I was saying before Ray's news and that break, the immediate beneficiary of the planned rise in national insurance announced by Rishi Sunak back in the spring is, of course, the National Health Service. But from waiting lists and ambulance shortages to recruitment and staff retention, the problems facing the NHS seem worse than ever. Now, a couple of weeks ago, my next guest said cash wasn't the answer alone. The NHS and health provision generally, he said, need both a radical rethink as well as urgent action. And I'm delighted to be joined once again by Dr. Andrew Vallance-Owen, an old mate of mine, a former NHS surgeon and former Chief Medical Officer at Bupa. Andrew, good of you to fit us in again. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you heard what Simon Walls was saying from the care sector, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. But same question to you as I put to him. Have you heard anything in this leadership campaign that gives you any optimism about the sector in which you are an expert?
Well, the problem, I think, is we've heard very little about the National Health Service. I mean, absolute priority needs to be given to the health service and to the social care sector, as Simon was saying. And I think the candidates and the voting members of the Conservative Party need to be realising that if action isn't taken, I mean, really quickly in political terms, then by the time of the next election, we will have even higher waiting lists because they continue to go up, and it will be in dire straits and on its knees.
You are impartial in these matters, and you have been for all the decades that you and I have known each other. But I was really struck by something that Henry Hill, news editor of Conservative Home website, said, and that was that in his mind, as a Conservative, the only party that would be able to reform the NHS and get away with it, ironically, would be Labour.
Well, I think history has shown that, hasn't it? I mean, Tony Blair succeeded to some extent in reforming a huge area of the NHS in terms of tackling waiting times and a lot of things. And for some reason, they seem to be able to do that, despite being the party which supports the NHS, because they argue that what they're doing is going to improve it. And indeed, I think it's fair to say that they did improve the things that they set themselves out to do, which was the waiting times and, other areas.
I can remember very, very clearly what you're referring to, because you and I talked about it at length at the time on GBNews. I'm sorry, I'm now with GBNews, on GMTV when I was working there all those years ago. And Alan Milburn, the Labour Secretary of State for Health, sat between us, and it was he who said the relationship between this Labour government and your sector, Bupa, is not a one-night stand. That was brave and radical, albeit from Labour, not hearing that from Truss, not hearing that from Sunak.
No, and I mean, I think really what we have to do, we're not hearing much at all from them, as I said earlier on. We really need urgently action plans. I mean, Rishi Sunak has talked about having an action plan, but my goodness, we need it now, and it needs to be cascaded very quickly through the service, really to involve the people in the front line. I think the professionals, and I mean all the professionals, the nurses, physiotherapists, people working at the front line, are feeling like very small cogs in a large wheel, and there's a lot of disillusion, and they will have all sorts of good ideas about what needs to be done, particularly about the workforce issues, I think. I mean, we've got over 100,000 vacancies now in the NHS, 165,000 in social care. This huge backlog of cases people waiting to be seen, often with painful and mobility problems, and we really have to act very quickly on that. And there are things that can be done, I think, to do that, but it will need investment. It undoubtedly will need investment, which is not coming now. If Liz Truss does actually withdraw that what amounts to £39 billion of funding over the next 3 years.
Because we talked about precisely that, and I was accused of misleading people by saying if the NHS rises don't go ahead, the money wouldn't be there, saying that, but there's lots of fiscal headroom, there's lots of other money in the system. I mean, my simple answer to that is it's already been spent on all sorts of other things as well. But just to add one final thing in...
And Alistair, they have an unfunded pay rise. to pay for as well. That has to come out of current budgets as well. I mean, they are really under pressure at the moment.
Yeah, and the pay rise issue was mentioned in the conversation earlier on, and I'd forgotten to repeat that. You're absolutely right. The final point, which is sort of slightly left of field, but plays to it. There's a piece in the Daily Mail on Sunday today that says there has been a really sharp decline in the number of pharmacies available, and they became crucial in the middle of the coronavirus, and they're very clever men and women, highly qualified in medical sciences, and they were helping and guiding and advising people. It's a shrinking sector again. That was a bit of initiative that seems to have fallen by the wayside.
Yeah. Well, a whole number of initiatives have fallen by the wayside. Can I make one radical thought? Rishi Sunak is talking about fining people who don't make their appointments. I think, that would be quite impossible to manage. And, I would go back to the French system where they have co-payments, quite small co-payments. So if you want to go and see your GP, you pay a co-payment. Of course, you're excluded if you have a chronic condition like diabetes or something like that. And it has had an impact on discouraging people who don't really have a medical need. And I think it's a more positive way of rather than talking about fining people.
Yeah, and I understand that point. The only thing I would say, and my final point to you, other than thank you, is to say that I think that Sunak got some applause at least for putting out the message there. Don't take it for granted. You pay for it, don't abuse it. If you've booked an appointment, turn up for it or else. Andrew, I really hope that whoever wins, Liz or Rishi, that they talk to Simon Walls on care and Andrew Valenso on the NHS, because you've talked a lot of sense, both of you, this afternoon. And thank you for finding time for us again. Have a great weekend. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks very much.
Dr. Andrew Valenso, there, former NHS surgeon and former Chief Medical Officer at Bupa. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. Plenty more still to come this afternoon. Now, today's the final day of Chinese military drills near Taiwan, which Beijing, of course, regards as its sovereign territory. Now, these exercises have been the biggest so far after Nancy Pelosi took a trip there this week. All of that to come. But first, let's bring... first of all, we'll have a quick break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome back. It's 1:45. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. We talked yesterday about Taiwan and Chinese aggression towards the island state. Well, today is the final day of Chinese military drills near Taiwan, which, of course, Beijing regards as its sovereign territory. These exercises have been the biggest so far, involving warplanes and fighting ships, all carefully monitored by other interested parties in the region, not least Japan and, of course, the United States of America. Existing tensions were not helped by the visit of the US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. Well, joining me now to carry on this conversation at a crucial time, I'm delighted to say, is a good friend of mine, the defence editor of The Telegraph, and there he is, Con Coughlin. I said monitored by Japan, by the United States, and also monitored by Con Coughlin. How worried should we be about what's going on in and around Taiwan?
Well, it's certainly unnerving to have China firing ballistic missiles over Taiwan, to be sending warplanes and warships into Taiwanese territory, which is what they've been doing for the last 3 days. My personal view is that this is a bit of a hysterical overreaction by Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. He's got a big Congress coming up in November, and I think he's doing this as much for his domestic audience as anything else. But nonetheless, it has raised tensions, and I think it's sort of drawn attention after Ukraine to what potentially could be the next flashpoint in global affairs.
It is always deeply worrying, and you're the expert, I am the mere observer, that when former superpowers like what was the Soviet Union and now Russia, and what has always been the People's Republic of China since Mao Zedong, suddenly look at the balance of power within the world, the quality of leadership around the world, and think, my moment may just have come.
Well, certainly, Alistair, I think the Chinese will have been watching very closely how the West has responded to the Ukraine challenge. And although in certain respects, like supplying the Ukrainians, etc., there has been a very good response by NATO, and I think we've all been greatly heartened by NATO's response belatedly. Let's say that they were slow getting there, but they did get there. But again, if you look at the Western alliance, you see a very weak American president. You see a lot of disunity and disruption in Europe. In Britain, we don't even have a prime minister at the moment. Macron is under pressure in France. Scholz is under pressure in Germany. Italy doesn't have a prime minister, etc. So, as I said, if you're in Beijing and looking at the way the world is going at the moment, you think, well, actually, there is an opportunity.
I find that fascinating because, again, on the Ukraine dimension of it, many people, although they perhaps have to swallow their pride in admitting it, will argue that NATO owes a good deal to the former President of the United States of America, Trump, for saying, get your act together on defence spending and support for NATO, otherwise you're on your own, sunshine. I mean, we would not have been in as strong a position, nor Germany, nor Italy, nor France, if Trump hadn't read the riot act to us over NATO.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, Alistair. And I would also add that actually successive American presidents going back to George Bush have been complaining about the lack of investment in Europe in our military infrastructure. And even though, thanks to Trump, people have been forced to raise their game, and we've now got the Germans committing to having 2% of GDP, the NATO requirement, on defence, we've still got a lot of catching up to do. Even here in the UK, we are in the process of reducing the size of our army to its smallest size before the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, this is absolute madness. And I do hope that when we have a new Prime Minister, this issue will be addressed as a matter of great urgency. But when you look around Europe and its ability for the Europeans to defend Europe against the Russian threat, I think you'll find some pretty big holes at the moment. And thank God we've got the Americans to help us still.
Fascinating, Con, because our previous conversation before you were kind enough to join us was about spending on and reform of the NHS and the care sector and how little really thoughtful exchanges there'd been on that sector. Both Liz and Rishi are making defence spending and the percentage of GDP that goes on defence spending quite a big issue, front and centre of the campaign. They're reading something about what makes the Brits tick.
Yeah, well, on that, Alistair, what I would say is that when Boris Johnson was in power, it was Liz Truss as Foreign Secretary, who, of course, is very engaged in global security issues, who was calling for a significant increase in defence spending. And it was Rishi Sunak as Chancellor who was saying, go away, don't be stupid. So on the defence issue, I think Mr. Sunak's got a lot of catching up to do. And I worry whether he's seriously interested in defence and security issues. I mean, the guy's a hedgie. He likes making money and looking after money. I don't think he's got a defence bonus.
I'm the candidate in this contest who...
Sorry, Con. I think we had a bit of thing. Yeah, no, Rishi did interrupt you, and I'm going to now interrupt Rishi and ask my colleagues clear the decks there. So I can I have Con back for... You were on a crucial point there. I know where you were going, but repeat it for the people kind enough to be watching and listening. And that is, you were saying Rishi Sunak's got a lot of catching up to do, ...
Yeah, well, I was saying basically his background is a hedgie, and he's not really, he's never really been interested in global security issues, as far as I can see. And he's, in my view, he's one of the people responsible for this ludicrous decision to reduce the size of the army and cut other capabilities. I mean, the RAF can't fly at the moment because they don't have enough ejector seats. It's taking years for pilots to be trained because there aren't enough trainer aircraft. I mean, we are in a pretty pitiful situation. And again, coming back to your central point, Alistair, if you're in Beijing watching the way the Western democracies are responding to the Ukraine crisis, you would draw encouragement and think the West is weak, and it might huff and puff about Taiwan, but what is it actually going to do?
Well, we may hear even more from Liz Truss on that, but I listened with great interest to your authoritative and impartial view on the views of the two candidates there on the area about which you know so much. Con, it is always an informative pleasure to have you on the programme. You're welcome any time, but thanks for your insights to Taiwan and President Xi of China, and also that lovely final bit on who's saying what about defence spending in the leadership election. Great to see you. Have a lovely Sunday afternoon. Thank you. Con Hochland there, the defence editor at The Telegraph, who knows a lot about a lot. Before we move on, you have also been getting in touch because you know a lot about a lot. And we're going to start with some of your thoughts on the leadership race and the NHS. Chris says the NHS needs to be discussed in detail at the hustings. The NHS needs a complete overhaul, but please involve NHS workers in the proposed plans, GPs, etc., and the people on the front line. What a really sensible point to make. Mark adds, in regards to charging people for missing appointments, how is this going to be enforced? Are the doctors going to become debt collectors? What about people who haven't got £10? Are they to be taken to court by their doctor? A ridiculous, out-of-touch suggestion that won't work. The nasty party returns. Just to remind you that that was a proposal that came from Camp Sunak, and my earlier guest, Andrew Valensoen, very much a man of the private sector, didn't think it was a great idea either. So that's just a taste of some of the stuff that you're saying, but please keep those views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk or via email, that's the email way, or via Twitter to me or to @GBNews. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News, and you can get all of our previous programmes and previous interviews right there at a time that suits you. Now, let us try and raise spirits a bit now with a look at the Commonwealth Games. The Games in Birmingham are in full swing, but this is the penultimate day. The home nation athletes have been picking up medals left, right and centre. The plethora of events today includes athletics and para-athletics, cycling, badminton and hockey. However, for my next guest, this time last weekend, it was his turn to step up to the plate when he competed against Adam Peaty at his first Commonwealth Games, with the hope of soon competing at the Olympics. I'm delighted to be joined now by Brad Newman, the Welsh swimmer from Barry, and there you are. My warmest congratulations to you. Before we get into the detail of what it was like to actually get into the pool with Petey, one thing that strikes me as being a total positive about all of this is that it isn't Team GB. All of the home nations have their own teams and all have made their mark at these Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, so representing Wales is just amazing. I think it's definitely more passionate about swimming for Wales than it would be for Great Britain. It just makes it so warming. So me representing Wales is like one of the first times I've ever done it. So it was just the experience was incredible.
When did you start swimming, and when did somebody say, hang on a minute, this lad's got something a bit special going for him?
So I started obviously learning like how everyone else did. I got chucked in the pool when I was about 8 or 9. And obviously I didn't think anything of it. I used to do football, rugby at the same time. And then it got to an age where I was about 15, 16, where I thought I need to start thinking about what I want to do now. Like swimming's becoming more and more. I'm doing it more often. And I'm like, I can't do everything at once. So I thought, let's just give swimming a go. And it actually worked out very well, clearly.
Yeah, no, I genuinely, I'm thrilled for you. I know that my producer knows your dad, and it is genuinely nice to make this a kind of a family thing as well. But I am a cynical old journalist, so I have to ask you this as well. So there you are, you've been selected to represent your fantastic country at the Commonwealth Games. You get the running order, the sheet of who's up against whom. You run your finger down it and it goes, uh-oh, Adam Petey. Was that terrifying, thrilling, or what?
So I've actually done a lot of competitions with Adam Petey before. Obviously, he's from Great Britain, and I don't know what, I think he swims for Derby, I'm not too sure. But I actually come up with him a lot of times. So there's a lot of other great swimmers as well. So I know he's obviously a world champion. In my race, it is a bit terrifying. It feels like you need to step up yourself because he is such an amazing swimmer. But you know what? Like, all you got to do is drink it in and know that you deserve to be here as well as him. You've worked as hard as him. So just drink it in, drink the experience in, try and hold your nerves, and then just sort of give it all you got in your race, really.
I think that what a brilliant and eloquently described philosophy. An honour to be competing alongside, and indeed your time will come, as he found in his own competition, where someone who'd had a slightly better year than him because of health reasons actually pipped him at the post. So as a buddy boy then, what happens next? What's the ambition? Olympics a couple of years away, Commonwealth take 2 in 4 years. Where do you go with all of this now?
So obviously I'm going to take a little bit of a break from swimming. Can't be too long because swimming is such an intense sport where if you lose so much of swimming, it just becomes, it's awful coming back. Like, swimming needs to be a continuous sport, otherwise you start losing the catch of the water, you start losing fitness. All this is so detailed in swimming. It's not like football where it'd be like you could just kick a ball easy. Obviously each sport is so much detailed anyway, but I think swimming is one of the hardest sports ever. It's such a great experience, the fact that the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games is every 4 years, obviously saying that Olympics in between each one. So fingers crossed, I'm not making any promises with the Olympics. It's a little bit more difficult to make that as it's Great Britain and there's a less limited chance that, you know, you'd get chosen for it because it's a bigger variety of people. But yeah, we'll see how my swimming goes. I'm going to keep on pushing hard. My coach at training, I train in Cardiff in the international pool. So, you know, I do 20 hours a week, 6 hours gym. It's very intense, but I'm going to keep it going and see where my years progress, really.
Few people I've talked to in recent times deserve success more than you, Brad. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and genuinely, on behalf of all of us here, the very best of luck to you, and keep in touch. We will see you at the Olympics. I have no doubt about that. Good to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
God bless. What a lovely guy. Brad Newman there, Welsh swimmer who competed at the Commonwealth Games. And, hey, Adam Petey, it was an honour. I love that. Great attitude. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more coming up on the programme in our second hour. More on the race to number 10 and more on our health system. Plus, one of your biggest worries, the UK drought. We'll be speaking to someone from the agricultural sector and also a vet to tell us all how we can look after our loved pets. All of that to come in the next hour.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
we don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. It's 33 seconds past 1. And hello again. And thank you for being with us if you've been with us since 12 o'clock. I am Alastair Stewart and we are into our final hour of the programme, keeping you company on TV and radio with plenty more still to come, including more on the all-important race to number 10. We've now got a brand new dimension to discuss, and that's what Con Coughlin was just saying before the break about defence spending. We will have a new Prime Minister in just 4 weeks' time, but what are they going to do about health, what are they going to do about defence, and all of the rest of it? Plus, one of your biggest worries, the UK drought. I'll be speaking to someone from the farming industry and also a vet. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the latest news. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. 1 minute past 1, here's the latest. Rishi Sunak has criticised his leadership rival, Liz Truss, describing her planned tax cuts as starry-eyed boosterism compared to his own clear-eyed realism. Speaking in The Times, the former Chancellor said putting more borrowed money into the economy risks making inflation worse. Ms Truss says she'll use an emergency budget in September to immediately cut taxes. She's also pledged to bring forward plans to scrap the national insurance hike by 6 months. Former leadership hopeful Penny Mordaunt told us Liz Truss is ready to take the reins.
I think she really wants to ensure she's ready to hit the ground running, to have that emergency budget, to alleviate some of the cost of living issues that people are facing, but also to create that modern economic framework that we need to really fire up our economy and get things going again. That's what people want to see, and that's why I've chosen her. I've got a lot of respect for Rishi, but I think that she really understands what the nation needs now.
Well, Tory MP and former Education Secretary Damien Hinds supports Rishi Sunak. He told GB News he'll introduce more economic support when necessary.
He has been clear that that more help may be needed and can be forthcoming, and it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong to put out of the question. This is about a unique situation that we find ourselves in. Combination of COVID and Putin's aggression in Ukraine, and people are finding it extremely difficult to deal with that.
A new report commissioned by Gordon Brown says government support for low-income households will not cover the rising cost of living. It found some families will be worse off by up to £1,600 a year. That's despite an additional £1,200 being offered to the poorest in society. The former Prime Minister is demanding an emergency budget before what he's calling a financial time bomb in October. More than 1,700 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats this week. That's more than half the number rescued in the whole of August last year. Yesterday, 337 people made the journey from France in 10 small boats. Over 18,000 people have now made the crossing this year, the latest Ministry of Defence figures show. Border Force officials brought the vast majority to shore in Dover. However, many were taken to the port of Ramsgate due to concerns about congestion. An 11-year-old girl has died after going missing at a water park in Windsor. Members of the public joined emergency services in the search at Liquid Leisure yesterday afternoon before she was rushed to Wexham Park Hospital. Her death is being treated as unexplained. An investigation is underway. Detectives are urging the public to provide any information they may have about the disappearance of missing student nurse Owami Davies. She was last seen in the early hours of the 7th of July as she walked along Derby Road in West Croydon. 5 people have now been arrested, 2 on suspicion of murder, 3 on suspicion of kidnap. 4 of the suspects have been released on bail. The Met's Specialist Crime Command says officers are working tirelessly to follow every line of inquiry. Chinese military will now conduct regular drills on the eastern side of Median Line in the Taiwan Strait, according to state media. The unofficial line is a mutually agreed border that military from either side traditionally will not cross. Chinese state television called the divide an imaginary line established by the Americans. Tensions between the two flared in recent days following a visit by US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Meanwhile, President Zelensky has called for a stronger international response to what he's described as Russia's nuclear terror. It's after Putin's forces shelled the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe. During a phone call with the European Council President, Zelensky called for sanctions to be imposed on Russia's nuclear industry. And staying with Ukraine, and 4 more ships carrying grain have sailed from Black Sea ports today. It's part of a deal to unblock the country's vital food exports amid fears of a global shortage. Ukrainian authorities released video footage showing cargo ships docked in the port of Odessa. The shipments were made possible after Turkey and the UN brokered an agreement between Russia and Ukraine last month. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. Let's return now to the Tory leadership race, because it really does matter to all of us. As in just 4 weeks' time, the United Kingdom will have a new Prime Minister. That new leader will either be Liz Truss or it'll be Rishi Sunak, and things are really heating up between the two candidates. Truss wants to cut taxes right now. In fact, she wants to do it in just 6 months earlier than she had originally planned, while Rishi thinks that her plans are starry-eyed boosterism. He takes that line that inflation must be curbed first. So, what's at stake for these two? What has this race to number 10 meant for the party as a whole? And will they kiss and make up at the end of it? I'm delighted to be rejoined in the studio now by Sean Worth, who used to work for Dave Cameron and is now a political commentator. Just a quick take from you, and Richard Holden MP will be joining us in just very short order. But I asked you to listen carefully to what my other guests were saying. First of all, your take on what both Simon from the care sector and Andrew Vallance-Owen, from the formerly from Bupa, but himself an NHS surgeon, what they had to say about the fact that this crucial thing to so many of us, and very costly thing to so many of us, had not really figured on the radar.
No, I mean, I'm not surprised, because I doubt they really want to talk about it. The NHS is in crisis at the moment in terms of waiting lists and access to GPs. The social care system has been broken for many years, and I think in your piece you mentioned there's been all sorts of reviews and governments trying to look at it, and I've worked on it myself. Nobody wants to talk about the social care system because there's two big things. One is that people genuinely, if you look at surveys on this, and we did them as government, they think that it's part of the NHS and they don't expect that they're going to have to pay for everything when they come into it, or their parents come into it. And the second thing is that, as your guest said, the wages are terrible. 90% of it is in the private sector. The wages are terrible. No one wants to do the job. But nobody really complains about it, and that's why it's not ever on the political radar. But there's some terrible sort of personal tragedies that go on in care homes, and people lose their homes and everything. So someone's got to grip this at some point.
Someone's got to take a grip and have a go at it. The second thing, and we both kind of reeled slightly at what Con Coughlin was saying at the end there. I asked him to talk about Taiwan, but specifically on defence spending, Trump having read the riot act to Europe, UK being one of the countries that responded more positively, but Con Coughlin from The Telegraph saying that Liz is ahead of the game on increasing defence spending. Rishi had tried to block it.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, actually. If you talk to anyone who works in the Foreign Office or around the Foreign Office, like the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in Parliament, they're always terribly worried about the state of the world. So, this is prior to the Ukraine crisis. Something is going to happen at some point very soon, is what we've been thinking for about the last 15 years or something. And yes, we definitely need to spend more money on defence. If you look at the polling from the public, and this is what politicians tend to follow, they don't prioritise defence spending. It's literally right at the bottom, below NHS housing, all that stuff.
No, Taiwan and Ukraine may be changing.
That's changed everything.
Which the polls may not have yet picked up.
No.
Sean, for the time being, stay where you are, and thank you very much. As you know what's going to happen next, but I will then come back to you for your reflections, because I am delighted now to be joined by Richard Holden. Richard is the Conservative Member of Parliament for North West Durham, and he is in the Rishi Sunak camp in this leadership race. First cheeky question that I've put to most of my friends who are MPs who've come on, who are in camp X or Y. Have you had the call yet from the Truss camp saying, you're on the wrong side, buddy, if you want a job in the next government, come with us?
I've certainly had a few approaches, but I think that was happening throughout the entire campaign to date. So I don't think it's me that they're particularly after personally.
But you have influence behind the red wall. It matters. It's crucial. But an interesting, not admission, but contribution to how these things actually work. To the more serious stuff, not that phone calls aren't serious, but in the conversations up to now, including Henry Hill from Conservative Home, you know very well, Sean Worth here with me in the studio, there is a sense that even if she is economically wrong, Liz Truss on the tax cuts now, urgent budget, sooner than expected, is touching a nerve with ordinary members of the Conservative Party. You guys and gals are too clever. You talk about economic theory and the rest of it. Joe Public wants help now. Isn't she right?
I think the key thing is that you're absolutely right, that people in my constituency, members of the party, do need help now. I think the danger of what Liz has been saying today, though, is that will only be delivered by tax cuts. I think for so many of my constituents, particularly pensioners, that's just not going to cut it for them when they're seeing their energy bills go up, by hundreds of percent, potentially going up over the last couple of years by £2,500, £3,000. They don't pay enough tax for that to be cut from them. Rishi has already outlined how he wants to help later this year with cutting VAT off energy bills. But one of the things that we're going to have to do is to ensure that everybody can get through this crisis. And Rishi, I think, has shown through the last couple of years, whether it's the help during the pandemic or all the help with cost of living since, that he's prepared to really step up. And it's going to have to be more than tax cuts for big business. And when you think about it, basically Liz's plan is to reduce the tax on, EDF, any of the energy suppliers immediately. I don't really know how that's going to help my constituents who are really struggling with the cost of living today.
This is cheeky of me, but I'm going to say it anyway, but take me through it. How are you, having heard him describe, your man Rishi, that any talk of tax cuts was fairy tale economics, that it was nonsense, then did a mighty handbrake turn that you've just referred to on VAT, and is now suddenly finding billions more, reported in his extensive interview with the Sunday Times today, to give yet more bailouts and what have you. At what point did you decide that this man was still watertight economically and consistent intellectually?
So let me take those points in turn, Alistair, because they are important points. First of all, what he's done throughout the crisis, whether that's the COVID pandemic or more recently, is he's always stepped up to provide support where it's necessary. And he's always said that more support will be available. But on the big long-term question around taxes, Rishi has already outlined, and it's happening next year, a cut in the basic rate of income tax. I think that's what people want to see. It benefits those in work and pensioners with small pensions as well. And he said that over the long term, that's what we want to do. We want a lower tax society than where we are. But in the short term, the biggest issue to address, and this is what he said, is around inflation. Because if we don't tackle inflation first, rather than trying to taxes first, and with borrowed money, which is Liz's proposal, is that we have to do that, because otherwise all you'll do is feed an inflationary cycle. And as much as I want to see people have more pounds in their pockets today, if they're totally eaten by inflation, then I just don't see a consistent approach there from Liz. So I think Rishi's outlined his long-term vision. He's always been consistent about providing more support when necessary, but he's also said that big tax cuts, the big corporates from day one, is not the answer to that. What we need to see is them investing for the long term, because that's how you really deliver better wages with increased productivity in the long term.
All right. A very full and candid answer, for which I appreciate. Let me finish with you, and then I'm going to bring Sean in to converse about one or two of the things that we've said here. But again, not a silly question. I know crystal clear from talking to all sorts of people, not least Conservatives behind the red wall, that one of the other problems that your man has is that, rightly or wrongly, he is perceived to have been the leading assassin of Boris Johnson, a guy who many of your constituents who wanted Brexit and voted for you because you were in the party led by Boris, who was promising Brexit, etc., 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 up gets your man and stabs him in the back.
Well, I'd say that you asked me very early on, Alistair, in this interview, about whether I've been contacted by Team Liz at any point. I was invited, along with other MPs, for drinks back in October last year by Liz, essentially as part of that leadership bid for her. I think, in fairness, all cabinet ministers were sniffing around that at the time. The idea that Rishi is somehow, in a different league to the others is just absolute nonsense. What I would also say is the answer that Rishi gave the other night at the hustings, when he said he just couldn't face it anymore, especially following that Chris Pincher incident, and allied to the fact that he also then had differences with the Prime Minister over economic policy. I think that he showed actual leadership in leaving at that stage. It's not what I did. I've stayed as a junior PPS in the government, but Rishi made his point very clear on that. So I think the entire idea of that is nonsense, especially when the Prime Minister himself has said that he'd already lost the support of the parliamentary party. And we know there would have been that 92-22 committee vote the next week. We know he'd have lost that, which is why the Prime Minister himself decided to stand down.
Final question then, and it flows beautifully from that. And just to remind folk listening to our conversation, PPS, Parliamentary Private Secretary, it means you're on the first rung of ministerial office. But much more importantly, you hear how it works, you see how senior figures behave and this, that and the other. So you've got a real sniff of how government works. Can these two work together when it's all over in the second week of September, announced in the first week of September, whether it be Liz or whether it be Rishi? Can they work together in the run-up to the general election?
I think they can. And look, actually, the oddest thing is that I was on Boris's leadership campaign from early doors before I was an MP. Rishi was on it, and Liz was also a supporter of Rishi, of Boris at the time. So we've all worked together in the past. I'm sure we'll all work together in the future towards delivering a Conservative majority at the next general election. because I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that the idea of going back to a Labour government at this stage with, probably due to the electoral maths propped up by the Liberal Democrats, almost certainly having to rely on the SNP in confidence and supply. I mean, that would not only be an economic disaster for the country, but would also quite clearly tear the country apart because the deals that would have had to be done in order to achieve that coalition. So I think there are big things at stake in this leadership contest, but I think when it comes together, there will be even bigger things like the future of the country at the general election, and I'm sure we'll all be on the same side when it comes to that too.
Richard, great to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time this Sunday afternoon. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and thanks for your, as I've said to all of my political guests, your candour and your grasp of what's going on out there. Really appreciated it and enjoyed it. Richard Holden, thank you very much indeed. Richard is the Conservative Member of Parliament for North West Durham, and just to remind you, clear all the way through, didn't shift an inch, is backing Rishi Sunak. One of the standout points for me was back in September, I had a call from Liz's people. Come and have a little natter. We may need to make a change at the top of the party. September.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be honest, these guys have been jostling for leadership for a long time. I mean, I remember people talking about Rishi Sunak being leader of the Conservative Party about 3 years ago, and then that started leaching out.
Because it's kind of what they do.
Yeah, that's what they do, and especially when the Conservative Party, funnily, has been in power for a long time. People, the party always eats itself in some form. And they start turning on each other and they start jostling for position. Yeah. I'm not surprised at all that these candidaats have been at it.
Were you surprised you said it?
Yes, I'm very surprised.
So was I. But as I said, thank God for candid guests. It really helps folk out there understand what's really going on. The other thing, and it does relate directly to what you and I and Henry were talking about in the first hour of the programme, is he understands the fault lines in the Sunak tax position, but he still thinks that penny will drop with enough people that it's the grown-up, sensible thing to do. I'm not sure he's right.
Well, no, the difficult thing is that Rishi Sunak has, big parts of the media that the activists consume, the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Telegraph, literally actively campaigning against him and for Liz Truss. They're not economists, and they're not going to listen to this kind of, anti-inflationary economic modelling argument. And the other thing with talking about economics to people is that there's always different people with different views, and you never really know who to trust. So there are people on the Truss side saying, well, what Richard just outlined there is an argument for not stoking inflation when times are reasonably good. When we've got rising inflation and a declining economy, coming to what we might call stagflation, that's a different set of economic. I don't want to get too boring, but you just can't accept arguments, and these people aren't technical economists. They just can't work out what's what, and they're going for what they feel.
They sense, they sniff.
Yeah,
as the great Trevor Kavanagh always said about the Sun newspaper, what my readers want.
Yeah.
And the readers may be bonkers in wanting that, but it's what they want, and therefore the paper will echo it.
Yeah, they warm to the person, and they get a sense of what that person's like. I mentioned on your earlier programme, would I go for a pint with this person? Would I let them go to the shops with them? That's what they're looking for.
Final point is this, and again, it brings together what Richard was saying in that lovely conversation, and you and Henry earlier on, is the real gamble here is not whether Liz and Rishi is right now, it's whether they will prove to have been right come October 24.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Liz Truss, if she does win, I mean, we're talking about as if she's going to be Prime Minister. The big challenge she faces is exactly all of this economic stuff, and she isn't an economics or details person. She needs to get some really serious people around.
Number 3 in the Treasury at one stage.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't want to be horrible about it. I don't think she's particularly known as a great economics person. Second thing is you need to have a platform away from economics on social issues, and it could be, I don't know. I mean, I talked on your channel before about the. I've seen Conservative polling around all the issues around sort of woke stuff and education, all that. And if you get that right, it's wildly popular, but it's a big risk. But
give Kemi Badenoch a big job.
Exactly, yeah. Absolutely. She needs another platform.
Sean, it's always a pleasure, genuinely. I know you're a busy bunny, but thanks for breaking into your Sunday to come and spend so much time with us. Really appreciate it. Always good to see you.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Sean Worth there, good friend of mine, used to work with Dave Cameron and is now one of the go-to political consultants and analysts as well, here with me on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, we'll be focusing on the interest rate rise. Oh, I haven't mentioned that really up to now, have we? But goodness gracious me, watch this space. What is the best way to budget come the autumn? In this week's Summer Savings slot But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be wet in the northwest, but largely dry and sunny elsewhere. Here are the details. The most persistent and heaviest rain this afternoon will be across western Scotland. However, eastern parts will be largely sheltered and dry, with some spells of sunshine developing. Some rain may still be affecting the north coast of Northern Ireland this afternoon, but elsewhere across the country should be dry, although rather cloudy. The rain could also affect parts of Cumbria and Northumberland at times. However, most will be dry with the best of the sun towards the south. Sunshine will certainly not be in short supply across Wales this afternoon, with much of the morning cloud burning away. It'll feel warm with temperatures reaching the low 20s. The cloud will also be melting away across the Midlands throughout the afternoon, allowing plenty of sunshine to develop, feeling warmer than yesterday with maximum temperatures approaching the mid-20s. The east coast of England will offer a little bit of respite from the warmth as sea breezes develop here, but inland we'll see another warm and sunny afternoon. The dry and sunny weather will also be continuing right across southern England, with temperatures across the south in the 20s and potentially peaking around 27 or 28 Celsius. Heading into the evening, and little changes with further rain across the north of the UK, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
we don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It is 26 minutes past 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. And thank you very much indeed for so doing. Time now for this week's summer savings. Earlier in the week, the Bank of England raised interest rates again, this time to 1.25% from 1%. That's the highest since January 2009. But what does it actually mean? And do remember that it was surrounded by a whole economic review that was the stuff of nightmares, long recession, decline in living standards, and the rest of it. But how much will that interest rate rise actually affect all of us come the autumn? Well, my next guest has the financial gravitas to unpack all of that and give us the best ways to start preparing for it. I'm delighted to be joined again on this programme by Jason Butler, who is a financial well-being expert. Anyone in debt, anyone with a mortgage that's got to be renewed fairly soon will not be feeling a lot of well-being right now, I guess.
Well, no, nice to speak to you, Alistair. It's like anything. The this increase in interest rates, we all knew was coming, okay? It's just that when it happens, it's a bit of a shock, isn't it? It brings things into fore. So yes, people with mortgages, if they're on fixed rates, won't feel the pain initially, but they will when they come to the end of their fixed rate. And there's quite a few people who are on shorter term fixed rates that perhaps fixed a couple of years ago that are coming to the end of that. But 5-year and 3-year fixed rates have gone up slightly, but they've not gone up massively. Now, I'm not a mortgage expert, so please don't, these rates are changing by the minute, but a 5-year fixed rate for someone with a sort of 15% deposit is about 3.5, 3.6% for 5 years. Now, that might be slightly higher than you're currently paying, but what a lot of people can do, even if you've not come to the end of your fixed rate, what you can do is you can apply for a rate now, get approved for it, and with most companies, you normally have up to 6 months before you actually draw the money down. So you can get approved for the money now, and then just say if your mortgage isn't going to finish for several months, you've still got that mortgage fixed at today's rate. So that's one thing mortgage owners can do.
And your property is increasing in value, so in the longer term, big picture, your quid's in. I tell you, I was dying to ask you this when I knew that you were coming on the programme. A report I read a couple of days ago, which literally terrified me, was the number of people who are finding their way through the cost of living crisis by banging stuff on a credit card.
Yeah, that is the case. I mean, I must just give you a statistic here of my own. As you know, Alistair, I do financial wellbeing webinars every week. I do 2 or 3 a week, all to lots of different employee groups. And I ask this question, okay, so regardless of the cost of living, I ask people how they manage their day-to-day spending, right? So I give them 4 choices. A formal budget they follow closely, a formal budget they follow loosely, a sort of informal budget they follow loosely, or no idea, they wing it and hope for the best each month. And on average, 35% of people say they wing it and hope for the best each month. So here's a little tip. Regardless of what's coming down the track, and I think it will be harder and more difficult for longer than we realise, the first thing you've got to do is just get control of where it's all going, because most people don't know where it's going, or they're in denial, or they don't want to address it. It's not until you've got the truth of actually where it's all going, including all those little subscriptions, those little things that you didn't realise they're eating away and taking money out of your bank account. It's not until you've got a clear idea of your spending that you really can make any changes and approach this with a sort of degree. I mean, if a business winged it and didn't have a budget, it would be entitled to go out of business. But lots of households are sort of, hoping for the best and just winging it because they could in the past. But what the cost of living crisis says is, look, no more can we just bumble about and hope for the best. Some people can, but more and more people have got less and less wriggle room as core costs go up. So it means that now is a great excuse. Now is the time to be doing the spending plan, not budgets. That's for boring people and accountants. Do a spending plan where you say where your money's going to go initially. And if there's a gap, you adopt what we call the CEO approach. You're like this, cut costs, earn more or get more income, and optimise what you do have to spend. It's real simple, but not easy.
Absolutely. And a bit of corralling, saying that bit so that, oh, God, it's finished, so we can't do any more of that this month, maybe a bit more next month.
My gran had jam jars, right, for all different things, the water, electric and stuff, and it's segmenting it is the key thing.
Labels like my mum and my gran before her had it. Final point, and this is going to be, because I know you'll tell the truth, as you always do, but it will be tough love for a lot of people out there. As Margaret Thatcher famously said, you can't buck markets. The fact of the matter is, however much the Prime Minister and the government throw at us to help with the energy crisis, that energy crisis is going to continue for quite some time to come. Petrol prices, diesel prices, some of those are beginning to slow down, but it's going to be a real problem, and folk have got to get their heads around the fact that no government can solve it all.
No, at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. No one is going to bail you out. I know there's going to be help for very vulnerable people, and there is loads of help. The household support fund from your local council. There's various stuff. Oh, just one thing I must say, if you're not claiming pension credit, you can backdate that up to 3 months, and that will entitle you to that £326 pound payment plus the one in October. So make sure you do that. But here's the thing, there is no hiding place. No one's going to care about your financial well-being more than you, and you need to take some responsibility and just address it. We're all in the same boat. Share your stories with your friends, see what's working for them. Perhaps in a local community. Remember, we're not on our own, and we will get through this.
Jason Butler, it is always a pleasure. So talk to folk. It's always good to talk to folk, and get more jam jars and label them up. Energy, food, whatever it might be. Great to talk to you. Have a lovely Sunday afternoon, and thanks for breaking into it to talk to us here on GB News. Jason Butler there, financial well-being expert. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. Plenty more still to come in the final half hour of our programme, including As the drought continues and more regions are introducing water controls and hosepipe bans, how is the farming industry coping, and those of us who love our pets? All of that to come, but first bringing you up to date with the latest news headlines. Here once more is Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. Almost exactly 1:33. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The family of Archie Battersby are calling for an inquiry following his death, saying no parent or family must go through this again. The 12-year-old died on Saturday in the Royal London Hospital after weeks of legal battles. In a statement, the family said they'd had to fight for Archie's right to live with everything stacked against them. Barts Health NHS Trust has issued a statement saying medical staff had provided high-quality care with extraordinary compassion. Rishi Sunak has criticised his leadership rival Liz Truss, describing her planned tax cuts as starry-eyed boosterism compared to his own clear-eyed realism. Speaking in The Times, the former Chancellor said putting more borrowed money into the economy risks making inflation worse. Ms Truss says she'd use an emergency budget in September to immediately cut taxes and bring forward plans to scrap national insurance hikes by 6 months. The Environment Secretary is urging water companies to ban the use of hose pipes as forecasters predict dry weather for most of the UK next week. George Eustace says some firms have rightly taken action to lessen the effects of an unusually dry August. He's encouraging others to do the same. Last week, Southern Water and South East Water imposed bans for their customers. Egyptian mediators have suggested a truce in Gaza that would start from this evening as violence within the Strip entered its third day. It's thought Israel has already agreed to the ceasefire, but negotiators were still awaiting a response from the Palestinians. The region has seen shelling from both sides in recent days, following a strike by Israeli forces on Friday against jihadist militants. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. And back to Alastair Stewart and friends in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
we don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 23 minutes to 2. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends on GB News. Time now for our regular rural spotlight. As the drought continues and more regions are introducing water controls and hosepipe bans, the impact on farming is becoming graver by the day. As pictured in today's newspapers, Open land is on fire. This is the scene at Stonehenge as parts of Salisbury Plain catch light. And there it is, spoiling that scene, but damaging the land. Animals also are facing real challenges. I've genuinely found this one heartbreaking. It's a watering hole in Cambridgeshire. As the newspaper says, it looks like the Serengeti. These are rare breed horses, reintroduced, and this is their water hole. It's drying up. And those poor creatures, a little bit of grass at the top, but virtually no water left there. We'll be talking about animals as pets and also rare breeds like that in just a moment with the vet. But one really striking example of the impact on agriculture is, for example, the growth in sheep deaths, and that's arising from mastitis, and it's brought on by exactly those dry conditions. So let's talk about agriculture as an industry first of all, and I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Cully, who is the chair of the NFU, the National Farmers Union Crops Board, and he himself farms in partnership with his brother in my neck of the woods, down in Hampshire. Great to see you. First of all, really kind of information service, what exemptions do farmers like you have from these restrictions, or are you also being hit by them?
So, good afternoon, Alistair. Yeah, so exemptions are on mains water at the moment. Bans are on mains water. So if we're on boreholes, then we can use them to feed our animals, to water our animals, etc., and to irrigate crops if we have that ability. So, but in my sector, the combinable crop sector, we don't generally water our combinable crops purely because we don't have that infrastructure, and the topography of our fields don't allow that sort of activity, as opposed to places like East Anglia, where they may well irrigate crops, but at the moment they're focusing more on their higher value crops, irrigation, field veg, potatoes and sugar beet, just to make sure they keep them alive, rather than increase yield at the moment, because they are so very, very...
You just said keep them alive. I mean, as I drive around Hampshire, let alone other parts of the country, and I'm lucky enough to, but I live in Hampshire, so I'm seeing parched fields, and I'm also seeing our own. We have a very small plot, but it's mainly equestrian. But we've had a harvest, we've got the hay in. That wasn't great, because last year wasn't particularly good either. But now it's been cut. It just looks totally barren. You guys are growing stuff to feed us and meet market demands.
We are, and the impact on the livestock sector at the moment is particularly hard. In this area, we are seeing little or non-existent regrowth of grass. So I know of livestock farmers and dairy farmers who are now feeding their winter rations. That they'd like to feed in the winter out in the fields, because the animals just have nothing else to eat because it's so little regrowth of grass. So that's a major impact, and it's a major cost to their businesses. In the crop sector, yields have been average or just slightly above average up until now, but we are now seeing a fall off of yields, because we're into the more spring planted crops that don't have good root systems, well-established root systems, that are struggling for moisture, and we are starting to see a fall off in yield in those crops. And also the forage crops, the maize crops that are going to be grown for the livestock, they are not looking very good in this area. My own forage crop is half of the height that it should be at the moment, so I'm anticipating a really poor yield on that. So we are building up more and more problems as this dry weather continues.
Yeah, and I know, talking to farmers in Hampshire, but I'm sure it's across the country, but you're the expert, you're the NFU's man upon it. Grain farmers will tend to sell forward into the marketplace for delivery at a particular time. Are you already seeing indications from that forward market that prices next year are going to be particularly tricky? Demand will be high. Ukraine remains a big problem, although we had in the news about some more ships coming out. That is great news. But are we as consumers facing the prospect of higher prices simply because you guys will be only able to produce less stuff because of the drought and weather conditions?
It's a really interesting one, Alistair. We sell our crops at world market prices. We are dictated to by the price of world wheat, essentially. So, ironically, currently, the last month or so, we've seen an actual ease back of wheat prices, largely due to Ukraine and wheat coming out of the Ukraine. But also with milling wheat, for instance, only 10% of the price of a standard loaf of bread is made up of the wheat itself. There are higher, bigger inflationary pressures such as energy that go into that production of that loaf of bread. So it's not natural progression to see if we have a poor harvest or we suffer continual poor harvest just in this country, that we will see a massive increase in the price of a loaf of bread. But that could be different for other sectors. Livestock farming, poultry, pigs, they are, their cost production involved with feed wheat, feed grains, it's a far bigger part of their cost production. So, you could see either a price rise in those, a needed price rise in those, in chicken, beef, dairy, etc. You could see that coming in just to keep, so those farmers can carry on farming and producing the food that you rightly said, the great British food that we produce.
Well, thank you for all of that, Matt, and helping us to understand what's going on. Those of us who love our gardens have a little bit to worry about, but you guys making a living out of it and keeping us fed have bigger problems. But I'm so glad at the end there you put it in context. It's not Armageddon, but it just means we've all got to be a bit more careful and watch that development. Pleasure to have you on board, Matt. Thank you very much indeed, and stay in touch with us. Matt Cully there, COPS Board Chair at the National Farmers Union. But as I said right at the very beginning, it isn't only farming, although farming really does matter to all of us. Many of us are pet owners and pet lovers, and for those creatures, the drought is a nightmare too. So I wanted to talk to a vet, and Danny Chambers is a vet, and he's also from Winchester. It's a very Hampshire-rich programme this afternoon, I'm thrilled to say. You and I both know, because that's where we live and work, or where we live, rather, I work up here, that Southern Water was one of the first to introduce a hosepipe ban. Gardeners will go, oh, what have you. But are there dangers there as well if, like me, you've got dogs, you've got cats, and in my case, you've got horses as well? What are we going to be careful about?
Yeah, absolutely. Every summer, we always see a lot of dogs in particular getting heat stroke. And that's often because they've been left in the car. That's the classic case that people are often quite aware of, because a dog can die from heat stroke when it's been left in the car for just 15 minutes in this heat. And also, there's quite a lot of research that's shown that opening the windows a crack makes no difference to the temperature of the car inside. So dogs can only cool down by panting. They can't sweat like we do. And so when the outside air temperature is hotter than them, they really, really struggle to cool down. But I think what will probably surprise most people is that vets see 10 times as many dogs for heat stroke because they've been walked in the sunshine or exercised in the middle of the day than they do from being left locked in hot cars by mistake. So you're much more likely to give your dog heat stroke by walking it in the height of the sun. I think the big message I would say is that no dog's going to die from missing a walk on a really hot day, as they might do if you take them out for too much of a run in this heat.
I genuinely did not know that. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun, and it's blindingly obvious. Just listen to Noel Coward, and it's true there. I hope everybody who loves their dogs like we do registered that. Go out early in the morning or late in the evening because they still need a walk, but don't do it in the mad heat. What about water? You don't need a hose pipe to top up water for a dog or a cat, but with horses, we've got to keep our bins and what have you topped up with water for them in the fields. But they do desperately need water 24/7, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. You need water 24/7, any type of animal. And it's really important for cooling down. I mean, actually, I treat mostly horses. I do some dogs and cats, but my primary job is horses. So, I might come to your place at some point. But there's a big problem with horses and cattle, actually.
Yeah.
If they're white and they've got pink noses or pink eyes, they can get sunburnt. And in this heat, it's very easy for them to get sunburnt if they haven't got shade. And it might sound a bit ridiculous, but putting sun cream on the pink bits can make a huge difference, because it's not very uncommon for us to have to remove eyes or tumours because they get sunburnt, they get something called a squamous cell carcinoma, just like people do. We end up having to remove them. And horses and in cattle, we often end up removing eyes because they've ended up getting tumours because of the sunshine.
Yeah.
So they definitely need shade as well as water.
Yeah. No, I'm delighted to share with you and everybody kind enough to listen to our conversation that Mrs. Stewart and the younger Stewarts are aware of that sunburn problem, and we do indeed anoint and appoint our lovely creatures when it's as hot as this. Final point, and it's don't get me wrong, and when I say it's not quite as serious as one's beloved dog, cat or horse or what have you, but a lot of people like me who care passionately about having a lovely countryside and wildlife and the rest of it, they need a little bit of water as well, whether it's birds or insects.
Yeah, totally. And a big one at the moment is bees. You know, if you see them, struggling, putting out some little sugary water for them so that they can revive themselves, that can make a big difference to the bee population in the area, especially bumblebees, the sort of individual bees rather than honeybees. If you see one flagging or struggling, just putting an upside down jam jar lid with a little bit of sugary water in it can really revive them and get them going again.
Absolutely brilliant. Danny Chambers, been a pleasure talking to you on GB News. I hope you don't have to come and see us for an equine reason with one of our horses, but if you do, we will know each other as well, and I look forward to talking again. But brilliant advice. And let me just repeat while he's still there on a split screen. Just opening the window a little bit will not save your dog. Take it for a walk when it's cooler, first thing in the morning, or later at night, or you will have problems. Danny said it, not me. Right. I just repeated it. Thank you, Danny. Take care. See you again soon, I hope. Brilliant. Danny Baker, Danny Chambers there, veterinary surgeon from Winchester. Now, we're coming to the final 15 minutes or so of the programme. We've spoken in depth across the weekend about the race to number 10 and what is at stake for the final two candidates. And before we go any further, I would just like to very quickly address this matter, which is coming to me directly from D. Madison. I've listened from day one to Alastair Stewart, and I always thought that until today's programme he was balanced. Every interview on leadership he has had a go at Liz Truss and agreed with the Rishi Sunak camp and what they're doing. He's showing his bias now. I am not, and I never have done. I talked to Richard Holden about the fault lines in his man's campaign. I talked to Sean and the others about the fails that have been perceived by many people, greater minds than mine, in the Liz Truss camp. My job is to listen to both of them and to answer those criticisms and probe them. Don't go on Twitter accusing me of being biased, because I am not. Thank you. Now, we all know that the majority of us will not get a say who's going to be the next Prime Minister. But those who do get a say are the grassroots members from right across the country. We're into the final 4 weeks and there are still many more local hustings to go, the most recent one being in Eastbourne and the next coming up in Manchester. I'm delighted to be joined now by Councillor Arnie Saunders. Arnie is the Deputy Chairman of the Salford Conservative Federation and he is a councillor himself for Kersal. And is it Broughton Park or Broughton, Archie?
We pronounce it Broughton.
Broughton, then so it shall be. Now, the Manchester Huttings are coming up. I'm going to be there. You favour Liz Truss, but is there still all for Sunak to play for, or is it slam dunk for your woman?
In terms of my own vote, I am in Liz Truss's campaign team, so I think it is pretty much slam dunk. But if you're asking me whether Rishi has got a chance, I think he has, simply because there is 4 weeks to go and a lot can happen in 4 weeks. But if you're asking me personally, then yes, my vote is in for Liz.
Fascinating. Now, my team, who spoke to you before you and I had a chance to talk, because that's the way these things work, they said that one of the things that mattered enormously to you personally was that you'd had the chance to talk to Liz directly. So what I want to ask you now, on air, is what it was that she said that firmed your position up, or was it her demeanour, her approach? What is it that keeps you so firmly and confirmed in the Liz camp?
Well, when I said she spoke to me directly, I attended 2 private meetings last week over Zoom or whatever. One was for councillors and one was for constituency officers. And since I'm in both, I attended both. So it wasn't directly with me, but it was a private meeting. And I was very impressed with particularly what she said on the economy. The way I would put it is this. Rishi Sunak's mantra is jam tomorrow, maybe even the day after tomorrow. What Liz is promising, the way I see it, it's bread today. And that, I think, is the most important thing. Because do you remember the old mantra, Alistair? It's the economy, stupid. Remember that from the United States?
I do indeed. James Carville, who was a political campaign manager for one Bill Clinton, who not only won once, but won twice. Let me put to you, and it's partly that, the thing I had a shout about, the being accused me of being biased. I will merely put to you now, as a Truss supporter, the criticism that is made by the Sunak camp, and that is that it is perhaps jam today and not jam tomorrow, but the longer-term risk of what Liz Truss is offering will be that you'll go into the next general election, inflation will still be high, borrowing will still be high, and the economy will not be in a good place for you and your party to win an historic fifth term. So what's your specific response to those who make that point on behalf of Rishi's team?
My response is this. I don't think we've got the time to wait. If we don't fix, and when I say fix, as much as we possibly can't possibly fix it completely. But if we do not fix the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, the mortgage crisis, which I think people have not paid enough attention to, but with interest rates going up, there is going to be a tsunami of mortgage, forfeiture. If we don't fix that in the next year or so, we're going to go into that general election, absolutely skewed, as it were. So we don't have the time to wait. When I remember in the pandemic, even Rishi himself said, this is a once-in-a-generation situation. We can pay this down over many, many years. All of a sudden now, he's very keen to pay it down as soon as possible. And I want to take him at his original word. We really need to look at the paying down the debt long-term and solving the more immediate problems that many people, including myself, by the way, have got with rising energy bills, rising mortgage payments, and all the rest of it.
Very sage advice and fascinating. Arnie, my final question to you is this, and I put it to Sean Walsh, who's a lot younger than both of us and used to work for Dave Cameron way back when, and Henry Hill, who is the news editor of the Conservative Home website, which you may or may not read. But my question is this, Arnie. Once it is resolved, whether it goes your way or goes Rishi's way, how does the party that you represent as a councillor and help manage as a chair of the local association, how does it come together after this bloodletting? Because it has been pretty brutal.
Well, let me say, I actually agree with you, Alistair, if I may say so. First of all, can I say, as a loyal councillor, as a loyal party member, as a loyal executive member, as you said, vice chair of my local party, I'm actually on the parliamentary approved candidates list as well, so I have a lot invested in the Conservative Party. I will support whoever wins. There's no question about that. I will support whoever wins, whether it's Liz or whether it's indeed Rishi. However, you are right. I am very worried about what has happened. And this election has taken its toll. There has been a lot of bloodletting. And I do think that people will have to work overtime. People like me, by the way, but even people far more important than me, the MPs, cabinet ministers, it isn't going to be easy.
No.
We've let ourselves bare, and we are going to have to come together very quickly and very, very well indeed.
Arnie, great of you to find time for us. Thank you very much indeed. Arnie Saunders there, Deputy Chairman of the Salford Conservative Federation, Councillor for Kersal and Broughton Park. And that's all we have time for today. Don't forget, on Wednesday, I will be back in his neck of the woods for the People's Forum with Liz Truss. And, of course, next Saturday and Sunday, I'll be here. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your week. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be wet in the northwest, but largely dry and sunny elsewhere. Here are the details. The most persistent and heaviest rain this afternoon will be across western Scotland. However, eastern parts will be largely sheltered and dry, with some spells of sunshine developing. Some rain may still be affecting the north coast of Northern Ireland this afternoon, but elsewhere across the country should be dry, although rather cloudy. The rain could also affect parts of Cumbria and Northumberland at times. However, most will be dry, with the best of the sun towards the south. Sunshine will certainly not be in short supply across Wales this afternoon, with much of the morning cloud burning away. It'll feel warm, with temperatures reaching the low 20s. The cloud will also be melting away across the Midlands throughout the afternoon, allowing plenty of sunshine to develop, feeling warmer than yesterday with maximum temperatures approaching the mid-20s. The east coast of England will offer a little bit of respite from the warmth as sea breezes develop here, but inland we'll see another warm and sunny afternoon. The dry and sunny weather will also be continuing right across southern England, with temperatures across the south in the 20s and potentially peaking around 27 or 28 Celsius. Heading into the evening, and little changes with further rain across the north of the UK, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
we don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.